Hi, everyone. So thanks for introducing me. So my name is Guy Rombaut. I'm from Israel. Maybe you can hear it a little bit in my accent. I'm very excited to be here today. So I have about 10 to 12 years of experience. I started as a young web developer. I focused on CRM systems, and later on I focused more on financial systems, billing, payments, accounting, and some others. I'm active in the open source community, mainly in of Cordova or Ionic, and basically now I advise to companies in such areas. Some of them is the fintech, security, and IoT. So I'm here today because I love technology. I'm inspired by it. That's on my private life and, of course, on my work life. And I'm here basically to share some stories or some experience with you. And today I'm going to talk about from monolithic to SoC. So what is SoC? Very simple, separation of concerns. I'm going to talk about how, or in other words, it means modularity. And I'm going to talk how basically modularity and architecture can make your teams or affect team sizes, or if your team scales up, then how can you make it more productive? As you, maybe if you know Cordova and Ionic, so that's more like a front-end. I'm coming from a front-end perspective, but my talk will not focus on any specific language. I keep it on the higher level, but it's good for you to keep it in mind. So about 15 years ago, websites were quite a simple thing, quite primitive thing. There was a server generating some HTML, some content, and basically, that's it. So there was some content. The interaction with the user was very basic, so mainly buttons and maybe some simple forms. So data could be posted to the server. The server processed the data and basically generated a new page. And later on, there was some dynamic pages, so you could get some, for example, loading screen or some more styles. So that was the time that JavaScript became a little bit more popular. Also CSS, which is, by the way, already at the beginning of separation of concerns, because you're already splitting some things that are just a tags language to JavaScript with some functionality, and CSS, which is responsible for the styling. This architecture that I described, also called the monolith. So basically, is the backend responsible, or the server responsible of generating the front end. So the front end, or the HTML template, is inside the backend code. It also means that it has a tight coupling, so we cannot run or build it separately. We need some time to compile it. It's hard to write unit tests, and I guess, well, we sometimes don't like to write unit tests, but in that case of the monolith architecture, it's terrible. It's going to be your devil. And of course, it's a spaghetti code, because there are a lot of different components in one code, and some views and buttons, and so on and so on. Anyone, I know it's Java conference, but anyone recognize this? Oh, quite a lot of hands. Can someone tell? You said you know? What is it? PHP template, but do you know which system? Anyone recognize this system? Oh, that's what I wanted. That's WordPress. Now, WordPress, in my opinion at least, it's quite a good system. So of course, for the monolith architecture, there are some advantages, which I will describe in a bit. But you can already see, basically, that the HTML parts, which inside the backend, that's what I mean by the monolith. So some advantages are, of course, that it's very easy and quick to write a monolith code because everything in the one place. You don't have to go to different places, to API, to different repositories, and so on. It's either to do SEO, so optimization for search engines, because you can just place the JavaScript from Google or from Microsoft in the code, and it's very, very easy. And also, it's better performance, slightly a better performance, because you don't have to make any API calls. And the last main key is about A/B testing. Now, when I say A/B testing, I don't mean that you have two completely different pages, but only a component of the page. For example, if you have a website, and this website, you want, for example, change only small part, like a button, so have one button in red and one button in green for some users, and see how the user interact and what the user engaging more. And that's much easier with the monolith. Now, later on came the AJAX request, which basically you could send a request in the background. So basically, you don't need to redirect the user to a different page, but you can request it in the background. Now, this is a very crucial point, because that's the point where we start having front-end developers and back-end developers. So or in other words, we start separating the backend with the front-end. So we have a loose coupling. We have a code which is much cleaner. We could support different clients. So if one day you have a website, by the next day you have also a mobile app or a different website. So it's much easier when you have an API. You could mock the responses. So you could mock the API itself. And of course, a little bit less server load, because the server doesn't have to generate the view anymore. So the backend doesn't contain the view anymore, the HTML. So it's a little bit also slightly smaller server load. And another important thing is the CDN, which is important if you want to support access to your server in different geolocation. And so those are the main advantages, but on the other end, it made the front end much more complicated. So now on the front end, you have to handle some errors from the servers to see maybe the API call failed because there is an internet issue, or maybe the response was not exactly what I was supposed to expect it to get. And also, the backend became, in a way, also complicated, because now you have to take care of the communication layer. You have to build a layer for SOAP or for REST, and so on and so on. So you have to implement additional stuff. Also API versioning, for example. So although the code is cleaner, but it made it a little bit more complicated. Now, AJAX request was, in that time, was very complicated. To write one AJAX request took at least 100 lines of code if you just want to post it or get something from the server. And that's the point also when libraries and frameworks started to pop up for the front end. And for example, jQuery, which is mentioned here, to make an AJAX request with jQuery, it's one line instead of at least 100 lines of code. And later on the way, we start having more libraries, some of them taking, for example, Bootstrap, they're taking care of responsive because you want the website to work on mobile devices, on iPads, tablets, and so on and so on. Later, we had SPA, single-page applications, with Angular, with React. And now we're coming into an age of progressive web applications. So the front end, within the years, a lot of libraries and tools were introduced. Actually, quite a lot of tools. Most of them, by the way, from the last maybe 2 years, 3 years. And even in front-end, now you can even build a backend using front-end technologies, like, for example, Node.js. So everything became quite messy, quite complicated. There are a lot of things. And also, more developers. So the teams became bigger. But what it also means, when we have more developers, the productivity normally it's becoming much less productive. So how can we in such an environment with more developers, with more complexity, how can we still keep some harmony? Now think about an example. So when someone working on a feature, so let's say in a team of 3 or 5, so you always hear, oh, don't commit this, I work on it, oh, I have merge conflicts, oh, broke my feature, what's happening? Everyone can recognize this, right? And this is normally in team of 3 to 5, but think about a case of teams of 10, 15, 20, then what? Then it becomes even more messy. And think about your pipeline, about the CI/CD. That's also the point when CI/CD starts failing. And then you see everything becomes red in Jenkins, and then people see, oh, who committed it, what happened, then starting, which one is the developer, what time it starts failing, and it becomes a complete mess. And by the way, that's good that it's failing, because it means that your integration test is working, but it's still a mess. So I want to show you, we already introduced some way how separating backend and frontend can become an advantage, because some developers can focus on the view, some developers can focus on the backend, the system, the databases. But I want to show you more patterns of architecture that can be used to make the team more productive, to create some synergy in the team. I would start with micropages architecture, which is a non-SPA, it's not a single page application. And this is the microservice soulmate. That's how I like to call it. Because basically, each module can communicate with another modules based on, it can be on the session level. So for example, based on local storage, on cookie, or things like that. And it means that you will have less dependency, simple integration, because you can reuse it in different places, and also complete autonomy. So each module basically stored on different repository. So it means that every team can choose, for example, one team wants to choose Angular, the other team wants to choose React. That's possible with that architecture type, so you have complete autonomy. By the way, I don't think it doesn't mean that you should do it to use React and Angular and some things like that, but definitely it's an option with such an architecture. On the other end, there are, of course, disadvantages, because then you have duplicates of functionality. What, for example, if you have a navigation bar or a logo, then you will have to recreate it in each repository, and it could be that it will not be consistent. There will be also, because there are duplicates or different use of frameworks, some performance issues. And also sharing data is limited, because on the local storage or cookie, you can have only some basic information. By the way, again, I want to remind you, I come from frontend. So, of course, you should also split the backend, microservices, maybe if you have one feature, so a team that's focusing on the frontend and the backend, focusing on the one feature, so you can have a complete life cycle that is synchronized. So that's good just to remind again. Now, another pattern is the portal pattern. So we have basically widgets. So all the duplicated parts, so if you want a navigation bar or like header, footer, that comes into the portal. So in the portal, you can share everything. And you can share more data, more information, more components. So we don't have duplicates anymore, and we have a consistent UX. And on the other end, what's different or unique that we can put in the widget. So if, I don't know, you have like a website with some calendar or article, so that can be, for example, a widget, and you can reuse it in different places. Now, the annoying part about it, or the disadvantage, is that the portal has to be mocked. So if you want one team build one widget, you need to mock it. You basically need to mock the portal. And from my experience, sometimes it's not that easy, because you have some dependencies and things like that. Sometimes one widget needs Angular 1, but then you build some new widgets and you upgrade it to your Angular version or a different framework, and then it's breaking old widgets. So it also creates some complexity. So as you can see, there is disadvantages and advantages for each pattern. Nothing is perfect. There's no magic formula that works everywhere. But on the other hand, you can see that the architecture directly comes hand-to-hand with the organization structure, with how teams are constructed. And from my experience, for one of the projects, I already mentioned that I worked for the fintech. So for one of the big banks, they came with an issue. We have performance issues. We have some problems with that. We have problems with that. Everything is slow. As I mentioned, a lot of different things, but all those things that they mentioned were only symptoms. It was not the root problem. And the root problem was actually the structure. This bank had a very modular architecture, so they had a lot of components, which is great. On the other hand, they made it overcomplicated. So you could see teams that instead of enabling features, they actually were blocking you. So you had teams that you needed some tickets system. In order to change something, you need to submit a ticket. And you need to make, in order to communicate with another team, make a meeting 2 weeks in advance. And you had some security teams that build security features that say, no, 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 that's not good. We just block it. We don't listen. And being very narrow-minded. And how can you be agile in such an environment? So, of course, there is no magic solution for that as well. But what helped me to help them was, well, starting with some empathy, try to recognize what's the problem, and mainly trying to put the spotlight on the end user. On the moment you put the spotlight on the end user, then everyone starts focusing, see, oh, we want to build it for the user, this adds value for the user, then everyone change their focus and become a little bit more open. So you should be aware of something, it's called corporate immune systems. So corporations they tend to reject changes. Sometimes if it's about innovation, if it's about organization structure changes, they tend to just reject it and continue working the way they like. So this is from my experience. Now, in conclusion, we started from the monolith, which is the backend contained the frontend, which may be easy to write, but on a big project, it creates a lot of mess. On the moment you have big teams, it just cannot work. We continue to separation of concerns of backend and frontend, which was started in a point of time when Ajax was presented, to a more modular architecture with modules, with widgets, and so on. Again, there's no right or wrong here, but you just need to be aware that the architecture has a huge influence of how teams work together. And those are the only patterns, those are a few examples, and I believe that the future is going to bring us much more patterns and much more ways because we're facing new challenges. So I hope you could learn something about, a little bit about the evolution or the history of frontend, and I hope that for your next project you can maybe deliver a little bit better by considering how architecture can affect teams. That's, I would like to thank you. If you have, if you want to contact me, you can find it on my website. Basically, you can see my GitHub, my LinkedIn, etc., etc. If you have more questions, I will be in the Capgemini desk upstairs. Thank you again.